Shall we start?
Yes, please take it away.
Yeah, welcome everyone to our second filmmaker Q&A. So today our guest is Joshua Tsui. Josh has made Insert Coin, a documentary about the rise and fall of Midway Games, a legendary company that created Mortal Kombat, NBA Jam, and other arcade classics. So Josh himself actually started his prolific career as a game designer at Midway Games, and over the years, worked on iconic games such as Mortal Kombat and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater HD. And my co-hosts are Amelia and Klaus. Amelia is an account manager at FilmHub. They actually helped onboarding Josh, and they are a video game expert. So it's great to have Amelia here. And Klaus is our founder. Before FilmHub, he had written music to over 80 films, and including the iconic Pirates of the Caribbean and the Beijing Olympics. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
Oh boy, no. Well, I'm not a gamer at all, so beware.
Sorry. Me neither, actually.
No worries.
It's great to have Amelia here.
Gamers at heart. Yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, congratulations, Josh, for making this amazing film. I had my mind blown so many times just seeing all these moments that are very seminal, not just for like video game history, but just pop culture history in general. And I first want to say, people may not realize how difficult it is to make a film, a very engaging documentary just based on like mainly interviews. I think you did such a fantastic job. So my first question is just, could you talk about your process for making this film?
Yeah, no, but the first thing, thanks for having me. It's an honor to talk to you all and such. And yeah, thanks for the kind words on the documentary. So, my process was, I think everybody makes their film differently. So this is my first time making, a film, much less a documentary. And so I didn't really know what the proper process was. So I went on YouTube and just kind of saw what other people were doing, just trying to see what resonated with me. But really, I went to film school when I was in college, and I never, and so it took me a long time before I actually got to make a film because I ended up making a video game. But what ended up happening was I just figured I would just take a step at a time. And so my process was really obviously the idea for the documentary in the first place. But then I just really over time just interviewed people that were relevant to the story of the documentary. And as I was interviewing them, I just kind of evolved my process as I was going along. And a lot of it was just, the interview would kind of help me determine what the storyline was going to be and such. So I was very much working it very organically. I had a good idea of what it was going to be, but it really wasn't until I started talking to people that really started to form. But beyond that, I interviewed a ton of people, got them all on video and such. And I interviewed probably twice the amount of people that ended up in the film itself, just to see what comes up. And obviously, documentary editing is a whole other process. And from there, I just basically put together a Kickstarter campaign to see if there's interest in it. Obviously, I'm interested in, and we can get into this a little bit later, but I have a vested interest in the topic itself. But I wasn't sure if other people did or not. And so the Kickstarter campaign was really nice in that it helped fund the film. But beyond that, it was also a way for me to see if this was an interesting subject, because I lived in that world, and as interesting as it was for me, I had no idea if other people really cared about this stuff. I kind of lived in a bubble thinking this is like a compelling topic, and the Kickstarter itself really is what convinced me to move forward with it, because it obviously is successful, but it also showed a lot of people liked it. So then then obviously after shooting, I got into editing, but that's gonna take hours to explain. But it was I just edited everything down as much as possible, and I can speak more to it as we go along from there.
Yeah, please. Like how many hours of interview did you shoot?
Oh wow, I think altogether I estimate probably about 40 hours of interviews. I interviewed probably like 15 people, and each of them were anywhere from 2 to 3 hours each. Some people were 4-hour interviews and such. And so getting through the process of editing it down, I basically came to the process of figuring out the film was unique in that I talk about very specific games over time, and so each game has its own chapter. And so what I ended up doing was, let's say the Mortal Kombat segment, I knew I was going to have a Mortal Kombat segment, so I basically made a mini documentary of just for Mortal Kombat and edited to that. So I would have a half-hour version of the Mortal Kombat segment, and I would leave it very raw and long form and such, and then I would go to the next one and next segment and so on. And one of the things that happened was that I needed to tie in each game to a specific theme that's going on in the film, in the overall arc of the film itself. So for instance, Narc was the beginning of the technology. Mortal Kombat was a maturation of the technology. NBA Jam was the blowout success and so on. And then we got into the failures and the aftermath, and every game represented those parts. And so by making a bunch of mini documentaries with that theme in mind, I was able to start knocking things down to a presentable length. Because at one point I think I had a 6-hour docuseries at a certain point. And as tempting as it was to do a docuseries, because in some respect it's easier to make a 6-hour docuseries as opposed to a 90-minute film, because you don't have to edit as much. You can just throw all the crap out there and hope people enjoy it. But that wasn't my goal. So by making these mini documentaries and just keep whittling it down, that's how I was able to finally kind of form the film itself.
Mm.
That's amazing. Can you talk a little bit about the equipment you used?
Yeah,
for
so
shooting
I
and
was,
editing?
yeah, so at the time, this was, I started the process back in 2016. And so YouTube was basically my grad school in terms of filmmaking and such. I just went on, I just looked at what other people were doing. And I searched a ton of interviews with documentarians on what equipment they're using and such. And I ended up using a Panasonic GH4 at the time. It's a 4K camera. It was great for very easy setups, because the thing about the documentary was that I was going to have a very minimal crew, and on many of the shoots I was the entire crew, so I needed something that was very easy to set up. And I did, so I had a single camera setup. I didn't use wireless mics. I used wired lavs, because I was afraid of I didn't want to deal with anything outside of thinking about the interview. So that meant that all of my equipment had to be very easy to use. So if I had wireless lavs, I would have to worry about battery, and if I'm interviewing somebody for 4 hours, I don't want to interrupt it, changing batteries and such. So I ended up, keeping everything very minimal. The lighting setup was just simple 2 light setups as much as possible. I used natural lights, so I would rent a hotel room, or there was I don't know if it's still around. There's an app called Breather, which was basically you can book space, like conference rooms and such. It's almost like the Uber of office spaces. And I could rent a space for 2 hours, and it was great because I would end up in some really beautiful settings, for just to film these spots. I think Breather ended up getting bought out by Peerspace, which I used also for shooting. And so so it was me most of the time sitting down with people and talking. And the nice thing about that was, well, the not nice thing was that I had to worry about everything. But the pros about that was I was able to get very intimate conversation, because it was just me and the other person. Sometimes when you have a crew of people in a room, it gets very intimidating for them. And so that wasn't planned on purpose, but after a while I realized, I'm getting some very frank conversations, because they kind of forget the equipment that's around them. Here's a very non-assuming, little Panasonic camera on a tripod, a couple of lights, and that's it. There's not a crew of people, not all these other things going on to distract them. And I think that kind of came through in the film itself, that I've had a lot of people tell me that the conversations felt like you were sitting at a bar talking to somebody and that person is telling you a story.
Mm. I know you're kind of alluding to this, but it seems, I mean, first of all, like you're so resourceful, and YouTube obviously was, you know, your friend, but it seems like this was kind of like a side gig, or, you know, like something else that you were just doing at the time. Like, what else were you up to? And I guess I'm even thinking about, you know, Mortal Kombat being, you know, the video game turned into all these movies, and then here you are with this story that you're now just learning how to, you know, produce a film and doing. So what else were you up to during that time, and how did you manage that?
Yeah, at that time, this was when I started, you know, doing this. It was, you know, around 2015, 2016, and so on. And I was working on the Tony Hawk games at the time. So I was making video games while I was making the film.
Oh,
and
cool.
so this was a total, so this is a total side gig thing that I was doing, you know. And so I was working on it in the evenings, you know, after work and such. And you know, much like in the film, when you see the crew making the original Mortal Kombat, where they were just like making stuff up as they're going along and stuff, it was really in that spirit. It was very much this indie spirit of, hey, I just want to make something, you know. And I was very fortunate that it got funded, and you know, through crowdfunding. And so, you know, every night after work, you know, I would be with my family, and then after everyone goes to bed, I would be down, you know, in my office for all hours of the night. And you know, it got ridiculous after a while, because once I started really getting in the flow of things, I was really, you know, I was up, you know, until like 3 a.m. and then I had to go to work the next morning. But
Oh my gosh.
you know, it was just one of those things where, you know, I was very fortunate in that I had no pressures on, you know, on the film from other people. I didn't have investors breathing down my neck. I didn't have, you know, it's like I didn't have, you know, an executive producer outside of myself and my wife, you know. And so, yeah, I think to be honest with you, I was kind of spoiled working in that way and such, but it was a fantastic situation to be in. So yeah, I just kept working on it. And then after a certain point, the studio, because me and a business partners, we had our own game studio, and our studio ended up getting merged with another company. And so when that happened, I realized that I had an opportunity to take some time off to just work on the film itself. So I took off almost a year just to finally finish the film. Because the pros and cons of having complete control over the film was that the pros was that, yes, I had complete control. The con was that there were times where I got really lazy about it because I had no deadline. And it got to a point where I realized, you know, if I can just concentrate a good 6 months to a year and get that final polish in and just really, you know, just push it out and get it done, you know, I was going to take that opportunity. So that happened at around 2017. I took a lot of time off just to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think you touched on that briefly about cutting down from 6 hours. So I think how do you balance basically making a documentary for two audiences? You have the hardcore arcade fans and people like Klaus and myself, who may not be that familiar with the entire culture. So like, how did you balance it, and what's the most difficult decision you have to do during editing?
Oh wow, yeah, no, I mean, every decision after a certain point, every decision was crucial, and there was a lot of business pressure on the format of the film itself, because you know, at a certain point, I was, you know, like word got out about the film, and so I would have these very casual meetings with people on the West Coast, and they would give their advice on stuff, and you know, and there was a lot of pressure to keep it as a docuseries. The problem is that that wasn't like, I didn't want to do that. It just wasn't part of my plans. If I'd known that from the beginning, I think I would have done things very differently. And the main problem with it is that it's, for a subject like this, when you get into a 6-hour version, now you're really making it for the hardcore fans. You know, no casual viewer is going to sit there that long, no matter how compelling it is and stuff. It's just, it becomes too niche at that point. And so it was, you know, so I knew that it had to be around 90 to 100 minutes, no matter what. And for me, my view on that was, once you get it down to that size, then the casual, you know, the person that's not completely into that culture might be interested in it, because it's less of a commitment. You know, they can go in and, you know, 45 minutes in, they'll decide if they're going to go on any further and such. And so that, so I was thinking, I really wanted to make sure that I hit both audiences and strike that balance of, hey, this is new information for the hardcore fans, but it's still walking through the casual people on this total story arc. And so, I think, I'm tooting my own horn on this, but I think I did a pretty good job on that. There were a couple of moments where I thought to myself, oh, I might lose the casual person on this, but I know that the fans are going to want to know this. And so there's a balancing act on a constant basis. But there was one of the biggest cuts that I did to the film was there's a whole segment about the WrestleMania game that we made. And that was actually the first game I ever made at Midway. So it was very near and dear to my heart. And there was and I really want to keep it in for a couple of different reasons. A, it was my first game I ever worked on. I had great footage for it. It's wrestling, huge wrestling, fans out there. And so, but the problem was that in the arc of the story, of the overall story, that part was about how Midway was so big that now big companies wanted to partner up with them. And so at the time, the WWE, and back then it's called the WWF, wanted to work with Midway so badly that they sent their wrestlers to our studio for us to shoot them on video and such, which was great. But then it's the very same story as the Revolution X story, where Aerosmith comes into the studio and wants to work with us. And so we had two segments that were talking about the same story, and I had them kind of back to back in the film, and I realized, as interesting as it was, I'm telling the same story twice. So I had to make a decision: who's more interesting, Aerosmith or wrestlers? And it could have went either way on it, to be quite honest with you. And so it was almost like the flip of a coin of who's going to be more interesting. And I just really like the musical aspect of Revolution X, and also the fact that it was a commercial and critical failure, and I needed that at that point in the story. Whereas the wrestling game was fairly successful, so that was a very hard cut. But there were other things, and there's the Mortal Kombat movie segment that was originally cut from the film, and that's my one bit of excessive fan service I kept in the film, because in all honesty, if that was taken out of the film, I think for the casual viewer, it wouldn't have mattered a whole lot. But I left that in because I knew that the hardcore Mortal Kombat fan would want to know about that movie. It's a cheesy 90s movie, and now obviously they've remade the film since then. But I thought, I'm going to put that in there because I think the fans will really enjoy that.
That's awesome. Could you also expand a little bit about the Kickstarter campaign and using crowdfunding?
Yeah, that was really interesting. So this is the crowdfunding campaign was in 2015, and I had back then there were a lot of there was a lot of energy in Kickstarter with indie filmmaking, and so I thought that was really compelling, because I had the idea for this documentary for some time, just because I knew a lot of these people, and so the idea of possibly getting it funded and basically nobody owning a percentage of it except for myself was super compelling, so I thought, okay, you know what, this is let's give this a try. And I really had zero idea if it was going to be successful or not. The one bit of advice that a lot of filmmakers, or actually not necessarily filmmakers, but a lot of crowdfunding people told me at the time was start with a very low crowdfunding number. And then, because once you get that goal, then it skyrockets from there. And that was like the conventional wisdom at the time. But that scared the hell out of me, because it was like, okay, if I lowball it and it doesn't go much further beyond that, now I'm committed to making this film. That's going to be trouble for myself. So I actually put in a fairly realistic budget on it, and luckily, I hit that. But a lot of people who haven't done crowdfunding or Kickstarter campaigns don't realize is just how much work is involved leading up to it and also during the campaign. And I was very fortunate that the year before I had funded a film called The Lost Arcade, and it was super, the subject matter was super compelling to me, obviously, just because of video games. But I remember that arcade in New York's Chinatown, and so when I found out about that, I I got really excited, and I funded it enough that I became the executive producer, or one of the executive producers on the film. And the funny thing about that was I kind of did that on purpose because I wanted to get myself in so I can ask the filmmakers a ton of questions that they're obligated to answer me because I gave them so much money and such. So they ended up becoming kind of mentors for me for my own crowdfunding. And so I learned a lot of lessons from them. And they warned me about just, hey, here's what you need to do to prepare for it and stuff. And so I did a ton of PR work, getting images from the film, the storylines and such. And from my years in video game development, I got a lot of relationship with the media, particularly in video games. And so probably a good month or two before the campaign, I called in all my favors to all the PR people I knew, all the media people I knew, and got them, I basically wrote the story of the Kickstarter campaign for them, and they can just basically do, take it verbatim or change it however they want. And this is coming from my video game experience, is that the more materials you give them, the more you do their job for them, they'll publicize it. And so by the time the Kickstarter campaign got teed up and ready to go, everybody knew about it. And so on day one, I just got, incredible amount of press because of that.
Wow, that was all before. I'm definitely curious, like, what happened after, once everything was done, ready to be released. And then I think this was 2020 and COVID hits, right?
Yeah.
So you had a big release plans. Can you walk us through some of that?
Yeah. So the film was the film was actually done. Most of it, I would say 90% of it was done around 2018. And then I was trying to figure out how I was going to just, I was just happy it was done. I didn't have any plans on how I was going to distribute. And so it was one of those things I was going to figure out as I was going to, go along. And it's, in my mind, I didn't think that this was a film festival film. To me, this was just a small documentary project that I wanted to work on. It was very personal to me. And so I thought, I'll try to, I'll put it on Vimeo or something like that. Yeah, I didn't really think about it a whole lot. And then around 2019, an associate of mine mentioned to me that, you should look at South by Southwest because, that's a festival that's film, music, technology. It just seemed like the perfect festival for a film such as this, just because I touch upon, so many of these topics. And so, as weird as it sounds, I didn't really think much about it, but I submitted the film to South by Southwest. And that was really the only festival I really sent it to. I didn't think, because again, I wasn't thinking that this was a film festival film. And then it got accepted, much to my surprise, to be quite honest with you. And so that happened. And being a rookie filmmaker, I didn't know how film festivals worked at all, and so I submitted South by Southwest. It got accepted. And then once it got announced, it got accepted. Suddenly the film, I was getting outreach from people to have the film at their festivals. And so, I ended up, I think, in like 8 different film festivals. And I think, 6 out of the 8 were people reaching out to me once that announcement happened. So that was very eye-opening and such. And, I've told that story to some filmmakers, and I think they looked like they wanted to slap me because it seemed too easy, and I'm very grateful for it, but it just wasn't part of my plans, and it just worked out really well. And so I just kind of rolled with that. And so, it went on the film festival circuit during COVID. Obviously 2020 South by Southwest ended up getting canceled. And so, so the silver lining in that was, it would have been great to go to South by. I did save a ton of money by not going to South by, to be honest with you. So when it got canceled, I was able to get all the publicity of the film being in the festival without the cost of me actually going out there. Obviously it would have been great to party and everything out there and such, but it ended up getting, during that era, during that time period, a lot of films ended up going on like virtual film festivals, and then a lot of virtual theater screenings. And so we worked with my agency, Cargo. We were able to work out a bunch of virtual theater deals where we partnered up with independent theaters, and they for at different periods of time they would have exclusive on demand for the film, and so we're able to support a lot of independent theaters that way. There's one, there's a theater out here called Facets, and the theater was closed, but because they had access to films such as mine, from the film festival circuit, they were able to charge money, and people would support them and support the film itself. So it was doing that for during the COVID, it was doing that for quite some time before then it went out to all the different VOD platforms.
Awesome. And then how did you find out about Film Hub? We're all curious about that. And what do you like about us? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like I'm trying to remember. I remember there an indie filmmaker who does great work and is very active on social media is Noam Kroll, and I remember Noam talking about it, I believe, on one of his podcasts and such. So I think that was the first time I had heard about it, and then a friend of mine who made a documentary called Still Standing out in Australia, and it's also about the arcade industry in Australia. He basically mentioned Film Hub to me in regards to him using it to distribute his film, and so between him and Noam Kroll, and then there are a bunch of YouTubers out there who were talking, filmmaking YouTubers out there who were talking about it. It was just like, okay, I'm hearing about Film Hub like way too much. I need to investigate this. And once my friend in Australia got his film up, and he was telling me about how easy the process was and such, and he was very happy with the way it was going. I thought, what, this my film has gone through, it's been out for some time now, and I was trying to figure out different creative ways of distributing the film, at this point. And so when I was, between everyone talking about Film Hub, I went in and just looked at your website and looked at the terms and agreements and such. And I'm just like, oh, this is like really simple. It almost seemed too simple, to be quite honest. And so it's like, all right, well, so to your credit, that's fantastic. At the same time, that simplicity made me suspicious. But the more I talked with my friend out in Australia and would know them, and they were all they seemed really happy with their experience. I thought, what, I'm gonna give this a try, because it just seemed like there was good transparency. It seemed like, hey, at any time, if I don't like it, I'm not beholden or anything, and that just really helped out a lot, in my decision making. And again, I have. This goes all the way back to the Kickstarter campaign, because I have complete control of my film. Why not experiment and give it a try and see how it goes? And this allows me to be very creative with that.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, you'll always have complete control of your film with us. So
yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I was impressed that when you reached out to me, that I was consistently talking with one person throughout, because I'm thinking to myself, you must be getting hundreds of films, and so I just expected every time I contacted, something, or somebody was contacting me, it was going to be a completely different person each time. So that, in all honesty, that level of communication really helped ease my mind a lot.
Excellent. Yeah, that's what we're here for. I guess I'm definitely curious, because I've drawn so many parallels to your experience just in the gaming industry and film and everything like that. But obviously there was a huge shift in the game industry, arcade. I didn't live through like some of the arcade stuff. I know my dad has explained, like, he would save up quarters for paper route and go to the arcade, lost in the cave for hours. And, I've been spoiled to just have my own world on my TV screen or in, my little Switch or whatever. But obviously, like, in the arcade industry, there's kind of a death at a certain point. And, obviously consoles are rising and so many shifts. Do you see parallels with the film industry, or I guess, how do you see that going over the next years?
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, I think, one of the things, I've gone through enough cycles in the video game world to see things rise and die and such, and nothing ever truly dies. They're just not as popular, right? And so, so I think it's one of those things where it's like I guess the best way of explaining it is trying to be as entrepreneurial as possible, and that forces you to kind of go with the tide. because sometimes, if the tide is going against you and you're just resistant to it, you're gonna get left behind. It doesn't mean that you have to forget everything that you have to deal with. And so, it's much like my work here at the Paul University. I work with a lot of students, and I have to explain to them that the things that you're learning, are important, but things such as like technical issues or machinery and things like that, and and even software, all of that eventually becomes obsolete. Time is always moving forward, but it's a process of what you're doing, like the process of making something, of completing something, understanding why things change. That's what sticks with you. It's this how to put it. It's like this love of learning is the true value that you have. And so for myself, when I see the game industry changing from arcades to consoles to PCs to now mobile, and then who knows, VR or whatever, there are going to be people who are going to hate on it. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, but you're really wasting your energy hating on it. You should like apply what you've learned so far and keep moving to it. So I think for film distribution, I've always looked at it as a very entrepreneurial thing. I started off, this with Kickstarter because I wanted to own the film and have control over it. And then when it went into film festivals, I just kind of did it my way. And then, and then I worked with an agency and just wanted to go through that process and everything. And then, with services such as Film Hub, to me, that was another opportunity to kind of learn how this is going to be, and see how that works out and such, and just constantly, just kind of evolving with the process. Because, as we know, film distribution now is so different from even 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago at this point and such. And so, I know that, if I want to be complete old school and say, oh, I just want my films to be seen in the theater, that's just kind of silly, And so, I want to find out, hey, what's the best way to get my film in front of as many people as possible on as many different screens as possible, and what was going to help me enable to do that.
That's amazing. I think another question about the future of the film industry, I guess, do you see the game industry and the film industry like further converge maybe in the age of AR, VR, all the new technologies?
I think so. I mean, it's, I look at just if you're talking about just strictly production wise, obviously film is all digital now, and games are all digital, and you're seeing things like virtual production with like Mandalorian and a bunch of other films now using game engines and such. It's all converging, and that's something that even my work here is heavily looking into, is just how do you get people to understand the technology that they might not be used to, and who do they need to talk to collaborate on these things. But even beyond that, within there was one point with Insert Coin where I thought it would be really fun to do it as a VR, take a part of it and do it in VR, where you're literally in front of the arcade machine in VR, and you're watching the segment on that machine. And to this day, I still think about that. I'm not going to do it, but I think to myself, maybe with future projects, thinking a little bit more about these other formats as I'm creating it, because it's all digital, let's say the motion graphics are all in After Effects, it's very easy to repurpose it for other things. So if I want to do in VR or on the 360 screen or whatever, you can manipulate it however you want to. So I think giving people different experiences using the same content is much easier to do now than back in the day.
I am thinking about the structure of like watching Insert Coin and just how, the credits go down and all of that. And definitely, felt like I was in it. Definitely curious about any Easter eggs that maybe we missed. Well, I was looking like a little bit. I noticed a lot of just like subtle nods to the 90s, just even background screens of Microsoft bubbles and all of that on the screens, and the coin going down. But I would love to hear any stuff you have from behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm glad you caught on that. It's So the overall format of the film, I made it like as if you're going to each credit that you're going to a different machine. So this goes back to the idea of every chapter is a different game. So much like in an arcade, you go from one machine, to another little kiosk to another. But in general, much like a lot of games at the time, especially Midway games, we put a lot of Easter eggs like all over the place. And so in the film itself, if you look carefully, there are a ton of Easter eggs. A few of them are myself in the game, because back then we would put ourselves in the game all the time.
That's
and so they
cool.
use so they used my face in Mortal Kombat 2. I was the face of Sub-Zero. If you finish the game, at the very end, there's like a story that comes up, and they use my face.
It's you.
So that gets So that's in the game. The NBA Jam segment, most of the gameplay footage, if you look carefully, it's my character in the game as in NBA Jam doing slam dunks and horrible missed shots and things like that. So a lot of these little things, I want to put in, and that's in the spirit of the games at the time, because, besides the fact that it's fun, one of the things that we learned in the arcade industry is the more secrets that you put in, the more people will play it, and the more they'll spend their quarters. And so, the games are already designed for people to drop in a quarter every 45 seconds, which is ridiculous. That was a ton of money. But then when they find out that there are Easter eggs in the game, then they'll come back to try to find those Easter eggs and keep dropping quarters in. And so it was fun and also great for commerce, at the same time. And and then that was in all the games that we put in. So so there's a bunch of little things that if you look hard enough, you'll find them.
That's so amazing. I want that in real life. Like if I'm walking down the street,
yeah, right.
Little prize, yeah. So can you talk more? I know you touched on it briefly, but what are you up to now? So you're at DePaul, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm here at DePaul University here in Chicago, and I started here probably like 8 months. Gosh, it's been 8 months now, and I realize it and such. And so I'm the director of innovation here at DePaul University. There's a brand new center, the Jarvis Innovation Center, and so they brought me on to basically work with students who are in computing, gaming, and film and design, and basically trying to get students from different schools to collaborate with each other. And so, because of my background in filmmaking and video game development, it was just a great opportunity to kind of show people, kind of like what we're talking about, show people that hey, you as a filmmaker, you might want to, hang out with this video game person because you might be using the same technology, and vice versa. So it's great to be here. I mean, I get access to incredible equipment. I get to I get just as excited as the students to work on projects that kind of push the envelope on what we can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it shouldn't come as a surprise to me, but it's just so amazing how transferable just all of those different worlds are, and into each other, and education and creativity and all of that. So that's amazing that you're doing that. Do you want to make another film anytime soon, or are you how are you feeling about that?
No, it took me, as much fun as it was to make the film, I got pretty burnt out, but as most people do and such. And so I took the film came out in 2020 and such, and I took about it was like about the last 2 years was all about pushing the film and getting out there and doing publicity for it and things like that. So just in the last year, I felt like I was finally wrapping it up and moving on to the next project. So I have a couple of documentaries that I'm pursuing right now, kind of in early pre-production. Much like with Insert Coin, I started shooting already interviews without any real plans. I just knew, hey, this is a subject matter. I'm going to contact a couple of key people and just kind of see how it develops. So I'm kind of doing the same track. Obviously, I've learned a lot of lessons off the first film that I'll hope to take advantage of on this one, and and be a little bit more efficient on some things. So I can't really talk about what they are now because it's so early. I just don't want to jinx it by accident. But yeah, I still have the documentary filmmaking bug. For me, for me, it scratches an itch, that I have in regards to filmmaking. And again, it's always great to have these side projects that I can get to, during my free time. It's my hobby basically, and so it's nice to do that.
Mm.
Yeah, that would have been my question actually to you. Would you not be interested, or maybe you now, in like creating an adaptation of one of the games even you created as a movie? And what's the difference to you? Like, more interesting? What were the ups and the pros and cons? Storytelling process,
Yeah. There were times, especially during the production of Insert Coin itself, there were times where I thought, a semi-fictionalized version of one of these stories would be super compelling to do. And so that's been in the back of my mind also. And a part of me is thinking, what, I wouldn't mind pursuing it, but at the same time, going into that type of narrative filmmaking is going to be a pretty big leap for me. But then at the same time, getting into filmmaking in general is a pretty big leap. So maybe it's something to look into. But yeah, no, there was one, especially now, there's a big trend for about movies about products. There's the film Air, and there's the Tetris movie and such, and they're all very well made. And so stories in Insert Coin that can go with that, in that direction.
So I'm not really asking, do you have a script in your back pocket? But maybe you do.
I have an idea in my back pocket, but I don't want to be. I'm not a screenwriter, so it's one of those things. It's like if I can formulate the story, and then I can find somebody to help write the screenplay for it that really knows the subject well, but knows screenwriting really well, that'd be fantastic. Yeah, but I don't want to be arrogant enough to think that I could write a script.
Well, but and then I thought, when I heard that you actually started out on Kickstarter, but you actually said, well, what I find interesting is not raising the funds for it. I mean, that too, of course, but what's really interesting is, what we don't do in our Hollywood system is to collect user data and analytics by Kickstarter. Obviously, gaming is much more connected to tech. Yeah. Like this way, you just said earlier, like this way, you knew there was a demand. You were surprised by it, like amazing. Like, I got to do this. So I wonder if you could imagine, should our film industry a bit adopt to this and find better ways than our horrible, what's it called? The screenings, the focus groups.
Oh yeah.
Well, no, it's about people. So maybe you have some advice for us.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's data, doing that exercise on Kickstarter definitely helped, because it would, otherwise I'd be wasting my time, and so again, the funding was fantastic. That's definitely the benefit of Kickstarter, but just seeing the outpouring of support for it, definitely helped. I would say that in regards, once I had the film in a very, very rough form, I think at one point it got from 6 hours to just under 4 hours. At that point, I did a lot of screenings for people. And this comes from my video game background. My video game background is you test with people very early and often and throughout the entire process. And so I did that, not knowing that if people actually did that in films or not. And so that actually helped me out a lot. And it wasn't just once, it was constantly. And I feel horrible for these people because they sat through some really bad cuts of the film and such. So, but the thing is that, I selected very honest people to do this. And so later on, I found out, at least from some indie filmmakers, was like, yeah, you know what, people don't do that. Like, maybe you do it at the very end, but you did it too early. But the thing is, for me, that was valuable data I was getting, very early on.
Yeah, I believe there's no too early. Exactly. I think we're doing it in our film business way wrong. And I had it more than once that I was in the screening, and I remember, I think it was on Time Machine, where I came out of the screening with the temp score and everything. But basically, the film was finished. Only music would still be done. Of course, you can read it. And I rewrote half of the score, seeing it for the first time with an audience. Wow. And I asked the producer, please let me redo it. just give me a few more days.
It's
I mean, we don't do this. Like, there's no
yeah.
analytics with us, and I love that you start that early. Actually, in games anyway, of course. But
I was very used to that, and so I have a very thick skin when it comes to criticism, just because I've gone through this process so many times. And so I would tell people, just like, I know you know me and stuff, but just at this point, I would tell them it's ugly, it's bad and stuff, but just I need to confirm what I'm thinking about it. And so it gave me a lot of good data. And I think just obviously major studios and things like that, they can get the analytics however they want to. But I just feel like if independent filmmakers don't do this work, I think it's to their own detriment. I think they really should. It doesn't mean that they have to bow down to every suggestion they have, but sometimes they just it's just good to get that early information.
Right. Look, no, I actually think that you're right. But the studios seem to, while they have the power and certainly the budgets, don't just really do it, or don't do it like flexible enough. And I think that's exactly where filmmakers like you and many others, and that's what I support, like shine and can shine, like, and do totally things out of the ordinary, but totally only for the studios out of the ordinary. It totally makes sense. If you talk to other film, if you talk to other industries, like in Silicon Valley or here with gaming, they're like, but surely you must be doing this and that. And I'm like, that's not how we do it. Why don't you, test before you produce? Like, nobody does that. This is actually, I think, a great opportunity for everyone who's into film, and that's how you can actually, beat studios often. Like, what the demand is. You have the pulse.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're doing it for an audience, right? Like, you're really doing it for an audience. Well,
exactly.
Yeah, you know what for. That's great. Love that. Thank you. You taught us something here. Great. I love this. It taught us a lot. Very well.
I'm glad.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your insights and wisdoms. It's amazing. I think we have a little bit of time for the team. If any of you have any questions, please briefly introduce yourself and then just ask your questions. Anyone?
Hi, I was looking for the raise hand option, but I couldn't find it. Hi, I'm Logan. I'm an engineer. I'm a product engineer here at Film Hub. I was going to ask, so obviously I believe you were interviewing a lot of your former colleagues, right? So was it very hard to, get them to be honest? Because obviously, first of all, I guess 2 questions really. First of all, without making you sound old, it was maybe like 20 or so years ago. So different people's recollections vary. And also, as you are obviously a former colleague and friend of them, or friend of the people you were interviewing, was it hard, and mutual friends of the people who were being interviewed, was it hard to get people to be honest about the subject matter? And also, was it difficult for you to ask the difficult questions?
Okay. Can you repeat the first part again?
Oh, I think it was about, did people's recollections vary?
Oh yeah. So definitely people's recollections varied, and that was kind of tough to track that down. So certain things ended up not in the film because I couldn't necessarily confirm it and such. A lot of times people, over time they'll, especially if something is very popular or famous, they're going to want to take credit for it. So I had some issues on that, and I had to, obviously fact check as much as I can and such. But if there was some doubt on something, I usually would opt not to put it in there. There were some things I was like, you know what, it's, I'm not sure if it's true or not, so I had to edit it in a way so the fact got in, but the opinion was taken out. So that was very tricky editing that. But yeah, I mean, it's, for the most part, that wasn't a huge problem, but it did come up on occasions. And then, and the funny thing is that I had a couple of occasions where I would show footage of somebody and they would say, oh, that's not how it happened. And then they would tell me how it happened. But then I would tell them, it's like, but that's what you just told me. That's exactly how I edited it. You need to watch it again, but take your preconceptions out, because as they were watching it, they were adding their own context as they're watching it. So they're putting words in people's mouths that were never there. And so it was very strange when that happened, because they keep showing them, and it got to a point where I would show them the transcript of what people were saying, just so they could understand that it wasn't what they heard. It's, you know, so that was really odd. In regards to the honesty level, what was interesting was that because these games happened 20, almost 30 years ago, that separation of time made people more honest. Because they knew me, and there's, you know, and they can trust me, you know, because we all kept, it was almost like a, you know, it was almost like college buddies knowing each other, you know, over a long period of time. They knew me and they trusted me, so they were very candid about things. I think if I had made the film, let's say 5 years after these events, I don't think they would have been as candid. But so much time has passed now that people were just like, forget it. I'm just gonna, you know, I'm well into another part of my career. I'm going to be open and honest about things. And I think the craziest one was the CEO, Neil Nicastro. You know, if you watch his, he was just brutally honest about things, you know, and you talk about suing people and things like that, you know, and because he's, you know, he exited the company. He, you know, he's in retirement now. You know, he has a, you know, he doesn't care. He has a bundle of money in Florida. So he didn't give a crap about things. It's like, his interview was amazingly honest. I mean, and this is just the stuff that got in, but there's like a whole another 80% that didn't get into the film. That was just like, when he was giving me the interview, I was shocked how candid he was about it. And I think it's because of that separation of time, you know, has really helped things out. So, you know, it's interesting because one of the projects that I'm pursuing next, the events happened like about 10 years ago. And I'm hoping that that's enough separation that people are going to be just as candid and honest as this film.
Semi-related. So obviously you were working while you were working at the company while these things were happening, right?
Yeah.
So
yep.
did some answers which other people gave made you realize about certain things that happened back then, which you hadn't seen that view or something like that?
Many things. Yeah, many things. Especially Neil Nicastro's interview. Just, you know, the stuff that happened with him suing people and things like that. You know, a little bit of trivia on that was that when I was at Midway in '99, me and John Tobias, the co-creator of Mortal Kombat, me and him and two others left Midway to start our own company, and they slapped us with the non-compete clause. You know, and that's why that part is in the film itself, because I personally lived through that. And so they hear him talk about him pursuing and just throwing lawyers to make their lives miserable. That confirmed our fear of what was going to happen to us at the time, because when we left the company, we knew, well, we didn't know, but we had a feeling that they would do the same thing to us. And so for 1 year, we didn't work in video games. We planned our next game, but we didn't actively work on it, thinking that they were going to have spies and lawyers constantly harassing us. So hearing Neil talk about that was very enlightening. But even like the you know, a lot of these game developers, when they were being courted by Universal to start their own company, I remember at the time when I was at Midway, they would disappear for like a week at a time. We'd be in the middle of making a game, and all of a sudden, like 5 or 6 lead people would disappear for like over a week. And we had no idea what was going on. And when they would come back, they would kind of lie to us on what was going on, because they didn't want to freak us out and such. And so when I interviewed them, you know, I asked them, I was like, you know, we always had a feeling you guys were, you know, we're going to leave the company. What was that about? And then they talked about that, and I thought, oh, that's what it was. So yeah, it was almost therapy for me to go through and find out these answers. You know, it's like, oh, okay, my suspicions were correct.
Thanks for the answers. Yeah, very, very interesting.
Thank you.
Awesome. I think we're almost out of time. If anyone has any quick question, anything. All right, I think that's it.
All right.
It's a pleasure to have you, Josh. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah. Oh, thanks for having me. No, this went by really fast. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And yeah, we'll do this more often, and inviting the audience for this. And thanks for being like an early believer in Film Up and in this and spending the time with us here, being our test group. And you know, This is fantastic. Really, really fantastic. I love, and keep doing this stuff. It's really great.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, no, thank you. And yeah, thanks for all the support and such. But really happy to do this.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
Bye-bye.